I was about to close up the office when the door burst open, and he staggered in, his face streaked with tears and raw desperation. His voice cracked as he looked at me, eyes hollow and trembling. "I did it," he whispered, voice barely audible. "I killed her." My stomach clenched, and for a split second, I froze, disbelieving, horrified. Then I realized I was hearing the truth, raw and unfiltered, pouring out in a single, devastating confession. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I watched him stumble forward, clutching his chest, as if the weight of the world was crushing him from the inside out. His hands shook as he sank into the chair across from me, staring at the floor, voice trembling. "It was an accident," he finally murmured, eyes glossy with tears. "I never meant to," he trailed off, swallowed hard, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. My mind raced, trying to process the gravity of his words. My professional training told me to remain calm, to analyze, to guide, but a part of me, an instinct I couldn't suppress, wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but sit there silently. Instead, I kept my gaze steady, my voice quiet but firm. "Tell me exactly what happened," I urged, leaning forward slightly. He took a shaky breath, and his voice came out hoarse. "We argued. She was defending herself. I swear, I didn't mean to hurt her that way, but I lost control. One moment she was there, and the next, I pushed her, and she fell. She hit her head, and I panicked. I left her lying there, bleeding. I knew I had to come clean, because I can't lie anymore." I saw tears pooling in his eyes, and my stomach twisted. I wanted to turn away, to shield myself from this devastating revelation, but my mind refused. I had to listen, had to hold his truth in my hands. "When did you decide to come here?" I asked softly, my voice trembling only slightly. "Tonight." I couldn't live with it anymore. His words seemed to crumble his facade of guilt and shame. He looked at me desperately, seeking something, redemption, understanding, perhaps a moment of mercy. I felt the weight of his confession sit heavily on my shoulders, anchoring me in this fragile space between judgment and compassion. The room felt colder, the silence thick with unspoken questions. I wondered how much I could say, how much I should say. The line between therapist and witness blurred in that instant, as I realized I was not just hearing a confession. I was witnessing a man unraveling, a life shattered by his own hands. And yet, amid the chaos of my thoughts, I remained silent. Because sometimes the most brutal truths are spoken not in words, but in silence. And I knew that this moment would mark the beginning of a long, treacherous journey, one where I had to decide how much of myself I could give to a man who had just laid his darkness bare. I took a deep breath as I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and pushed the door open. The sight that greeted me froze the air in my lungs. Lucas stood there, hands trembling, a crimson splash staining his shirt, eyes wide and pleading, almost begging for something I couldn't quite grasp. The scent of blood hung heavy, suffocating, and I felt my heart race faster than I thought possible. Every instinct screamed for me to turn away, to close the door and pretend I hadn't seen, but I stayed rooted in place, rooted in the moment that felt suspended between dread and curiosity. He looked at me with such raw desperation, like a wounded animal caught in a trap. His eyes, usually so guarded, now betrayed his torment, wide, searching, imploring. I could see the chaos swirling behind those eyes, a storm of guilt, fear, and despair that he couldn't contain. It struck me then how much pain he was trying to hide beneath that frantic expression, how much he was begging me, without words, to understand, to make sense of what I was witnessing. The silence stretched, thick and oppressive, and I kept my gaze fixed on him. My mind raced, trying to process the enormity of what I was seeing and what he was revealing. I knew I shouldn't speak, should probably call someone, do something to stop whatever was happening. But instead, I found my voice hoarse and almost swallowed by the weight of it. "Lucas," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "What happened?" He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but no words came out at first. Only a choking sound, then a shuddering breath. his hands clenched into fists, blood seeping from the cut on his palm, dripping onto the floor. His eyes flickered with an agony I had never seen before, desperation mixed with shame. For a moment, I saw past the blood and the chaos, glimpsed the man beneath, broken, lost, desperately searching for redemption or perhaps just a way to breathe through the nightmare he had become. Then, with a voice cracked and trembling, he whispered, "I did it. I killed her." The words fled from him like an eruption, violent and uncontrollable, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. My mind refused to process the enormity of it at first. A part of me wanted to deny, to retreat from the raw truth spilling out before me. But I was rooted there, witnessing something far more devastating than I had ever imagined. My heart thudded painfully, a visceral echo of his confession. I watched his shoulders shake as he sank to his knees, blood still staining his hands and shirt. He looked up at me then, eyes wide and imploring, bloodshot and haunted. I wanted to reach out, to grab him and shake the truth loose. Instead, I remained silent, feeling the silence press against my chest like a suffocating shroud. The room seemed to close in, the outside world dissolving to insignificance. All that mattered now was this fragile, broken man and the confession he couldn't undo. In that moment, 1,000 questions flooded my mind. What drove him? How deep did his guilt run? Could he ever find a way to forgive himself? But I knew I had to be careful. My role was not to judge, not to condemn, but to hold space for this agony, to bear witness, and to decide how much of my own humanity I could offer in exchange for his truth. As the seconds stretched endlessly, I fought to keep my composure. I knew this wasn't the end, only a new beginning, a step into darkness that neither of us could escape easily. I had no idea what would come next, if healing was even possible after such a revelation. But I understood, then and there, that I had to stay present, to stay open, and to see where this unthinkable truth would lead us. Because sometimes the most profound revelations aren't spoken aloud. They're felt, buried deep beneath layers of guilt and pain. And I could feel that truth settling between us, unspoken but undeniable. I was about to enter a labyrinth I had only glimpsed in nightmares, a place where I would have to navigate my own limits to help him find a sliver of light in that suffocating darkness. I can still hear the tremor in his voice as he leaned in closer, almost whispering, yet the urgency in his words cut through the silence like a blade. "Fui eu que matei ela," he muttered, almost in despair, clutching a hidden knife beneath his clothing as if it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. The sight of it, trembling in his hand, seized my breath. My mind froze, a flood of images rushing through me. Shadows of her face, the chaos of that night, the terrible truth he carried. I sat there, rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the raw vulnerability etched into his face. It was as if the confession had torn a gaping hole in the fragile veneer of composure he tried to maintain. My eyes fixated on his trembling hand, the way his knuckles white-knuckled around the concealed steel. I could see the despair, the guilt, the desperation to unburden himself. Yet I also sensed an unspoken plea for understanding, maybe even forgiveness. In that moment, my mind felt paralyzed, like a camera lens stuck on a frame dragged into slow motion. I wanted to reach out, to grasp his trembling hand, to tell him it was okay, that I was there, that we could face this together. But my body betrayed me. My voice was caught somewhere in my throat, refusing to come forth. Instead, I sat frozen, my breath shallow and uneven, as if I was holding my own pain in check. The air between us thickened, heavy with unspoken truths. 1,000 questions churned inside me. How could he live with this? What pain had driven him to that extreme? Did he truly believe he was the killer, or was there more to the story? Yet, I knew better than to ask right then. Words might shatter what fragile hope remained. Instead, I studied his face, searching for the flicker of humanity beneath the guilt, the flicker of remorse that might lead to some form of redemption. The room felt like it had shrunk, the walls pressing inward, closing off the outside world. All that existed was this moment, this confession and my silent presence. I could feel the tension, the sharp edge of his torment, slicing through the silence like a sword. I understood then that my role was not to judge, not to condemn, but to hold space for whatever was to come, whether healing or destruction. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second a lifetime of unspoken anguish. I sensed the universe narrowing to just the two of us, him with his secret, me with my compassion. I wondered how he had carried this burden for so long, how it had eaten away at his soul piece by piece. And yet, beneath that, I saw something more, the faint shimmer of hope, perhaps the desperate hope that I might somehow help him find a way out of this darkness. Then, with a trembling breath, he broke the silence again, voice quivering and raw. Fui eu que matei ela. The words fell like a stone in the pit of my stomach, heavy and unrelenting. His hand, clutching the knife, seemed to shake with the weight of his confession. I knew this moment would define everything. What came before, what might come after. My mind lurched into chaos. How do you respond to such a revelation? How do you hold someone whose truth is shrouded in such darkness? My instincts urged me to reach out, to pull him into an embrace, to tell him it was okay, that he was not alone in this. But my body remained still. A cold numbness washed over me. I felt the full gravity of his pain and guilt, the unspoken cries hidden behind his trembling eyes. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but sit still and watch him unravel. But I knew that this was where the real work began, the uncharted territory where trust, pain, and redemption collided. I understood that I had to stay present, to listen without judgment, to be the steady ground beneath his trembling soul. His words echoed in my mind, reverberating like a ghostly chant. His truth laid bare, a secret that could crush or set him free. I felt the surge of empathy and sorrow intertwining within me, a tangled mess of human fragility. I could see the road ahead, dark and uncertain, and I knew that the path to healing would be arduous and treacherous. Yet, amidst the chaos, I also saw a flicker of something else, resilience, perhaps, or the faint hope that even the deepest wounds could someday begin to heal. I wondered if he believed that too, if he dared to hope that redemption was possible, even now. All I could do was stay rooted, breathe softly, and prepare myself for whatever came next, whether it was forgiveness, despair, or a long, winding journey toward some form of peace. Because sometimes the most unthinkable truths are the ones that peel away the layers and reveal our most authentic selves, dark, broken, and desperately seeking light. And I knew that I had to be ready to walk that path with him, no matter how difficult it might be. My body stiffened involuntarily, every muscle tensing as if I had been struck by an invisible blow. My breath hitched, caught somewhere between a gasp and a frozen silence, and I could feel the fog of disbelief rolling in, thick and unrelenting. My mind clawed to make sense of what I had just heard, trying to piece together the fragments of his confession that floated in the tense air between us. It was as if the universe had momentarily stopped, holding its breath along with me. I stared at him, trying to decode the expression etched into his face, how it flickered with remorse, shame, and an undeniable plea for understanding. His words hung in the space like a curse, a heavy thread woven into the fabric of our fragile connection. I could feel the tremor in his voice, the unspoken question buried beneath. Do I turn him in? Do I run? Do I pretend I didn't hear? But I knew, deep down, that the choice wasn't just about legality or morality. It was about what I could bear to carry, what I would allow to define us in that moment. My mind raced, flickering through all the scenarios, calling the authorities, confronting him with harsh certainty, or simply remaining silent and absorbing his confession like some dark, haunting lullaby. Instead, I sat there, quiet, eyes fixed but unblinking. I felt my heart pounding, a relentless rhythm that echoed the chaos swirling inside me. The room felt smaller, more confining, as if the walls themselves pressed closer to contain the weight of what had been revealed. His trembling hands betrayed the calm he desperately tried to project, and I wondered how much of his confession was truth, how much was remorse, and how much was a desperate cry for help. The silence stretched uncomfortably, and I sensed that this moment was the beginning of a new, uncharted chapter. Our relationship, once built on trust and understanding, now teetered on the edge of something darker, more complex. I marveled at the depth of human pain and the capacity for secrets to unravel everything in an instant. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions: fear, compassion, anger, and a strange, aching sense of connection. As much as I wanted to push away, to deny what I had just heard, I knew that doing so would be a betrayal of my own integrity. Instead, I chose to remain present, to listen with an open heart, to bear witness to his truth, no matter how unsettling, how devastating. The air seemed heavier, thick with the weight of unspoken truths, and I realized that whatever came next would shape us both forever. I wondered if he believed in redemption, if he dared to hope that somehow, amidst the ruin, there was a path toward forgiveness, both from others and from himself. Could I believe in that possibility? Or was I destined to carry the burden of his confession, a silent witness to a dark chapter no one could truly understand until they stood face to face with it? I knew I had to be strong, not to judge, but to hold space for this fractured soul struggling to find some semblance of peace. My hands lay still on my lap, palms slightly sweaty, as I fought to contain the storm of questions raging inside me. The truth had been spoken, raw and unfiltered, and I sensed that my silence was both a refuge and a test. 1,000 thoughts collided, each vying for dominance. What should I do? How should I respond? Did I have the right to decide his fate in that instant? The only thing I was certain of was my resolve to stay rooted, to listen without turning away, to be the steady ground upon which he might someday stand again. In that quiet, suspended moment, I understood that this confession was not just an admission of guilt, but a plea for understanding, a cry for redemption that echoed from the depths of his broken soul. I felt the faintest stir of hope. Perhaps, in some distant future, the wounds could be healed, the darkness illuminated by the fragile light of forgiveness. So I sat there, enveloped in silence, ready to walk whatever path lay ahead, whether that led to despair, to forgiveness, or to some elusive peace. Because I knew, more than anything, that the most profound truths are often the most unthinkable, and my role was to be present, unwavering, and compassionate, even when the darkness threatened to swallow us whole. I sat silently, the weight of his words pressing into the air like a heavy fog that refused to lift. My ears caught every breath, every subtle shift in his posture as he lowered his head in a silent plea for acknowledgement, an answer I knew I could not give. The room, once familiar, now felt vast and cold, the silence stretching between us like an endless chasm. I could see the flicker in his eyes, a flicker of torment and despair, as if he carried a storm too immense for any words to contain. His shoulders trembled slightly, betraying the calm facade he desperately tried to maintain. I wondered how he managed to sit there, swallowed by guilt, seeking forgiveness in a space that seemed barren of mercy. I felt my own pulse quicken, but I fought to steady it, to keep my face impassive. Every muscle in my body was tense, not out of judgment, but out of a deep, instinctive need to remain present, to hold space for whatever darkness he carried. I knew his confession was not just a plea for remorse. It was an unraveling of a fractured soul, desperate to find some form of redemption, some fragment of peace amidst the chaos of what he had done. The weight of his words lingered, unspoken but loud enough to drown the room in silence. I could sense that beneath his confession was a desperate hope, perhaps a hope that I would understand, that I could see past the act itself to the person burdened by it. I reached into the depths of myself, searching for compassion, an unspoken promise to offer no judgment, only presence. I understood that speaking or reacting could shatter what fragile trust was left. Instead, I let the silence stretch on, a space heavy with unvoiced emotions. I watched his shoulders slump further, as if the confession had drained him of every ounce of strength, leaving behind only the weight of his remorse. In that stillness, I felt the vast, uncharted territory of human complexity unfolding before me. His words had cracked open a shell, exposing a vulnerability I hadn't anticipated. I wondered how he had arrived at this moment, what darkness had led him here, and whether I was capable of guiding him toward some kind of light. My mind spiraled into questions I dare not voice. Was it my role to judge or to simply witness? Could mere presence be enough to help him carry this burden? I thought about the fragile threads that connect pain and forgiveness, how delicate they are, yet how easily they can be torn. I questioned whether I was prepared for what came next, whether I possessed the strength to walk alongside him through this darkness, or if I would eventually have to step away, unable to carry the weight of his truth. Still, in that moment, I chose to remain rooted, my gaze steady but gentle, my silence a shield and a sanctuary. As he looked up briefly, meeting my eyes with a flicker of hope, I realized that this was only the beginning of what would be a long, arduous journey. I understood that words might be insufficient, that actions, time, and patience would be required to mend what was broken. But for now, I simply sat with him, embodying the quiet strength of someone willing to face the unthinkable, knowing that sometimes the greatest act of compassion is simply to listen and to hold space for what cannot yet be understood. I sat silently, the weight of his words pressing into the air like a heavy fog that refused to lift. My eyes remained fixed on his face, searching for a flicker of truth amid the storm of guilt and fear that played across his features. He looked fragile, almost transparent, as if the confession had stripped away any false layers he had carefully constructed. I could see the tremor in his lips, the way his hands fidgeted without purpose, betraying his attempt to hold it all together. But I didn't speak. I knew that sometimes the most vital thing I could do was simply listen. As he finally whispered, "Fui eu queimete ela," I felt an icy ripple pass through me. My mind raced to process the words, to grasp their meaning fully. Not to judge. No, that was not my role. Just to understand what had driven him here, what darkness had crept into his soul that he felt compelled to confess. The room seemed to contract, the silence stretching so thick I could taste it. Outside, the world continued its indifferent spin, unaware of the storm unfolding within these four walls. But inside, everything was raw, exposed, vulnerable. I observed his expression shift as he struggled to contain the flood of emotion behind his eyes. A mixture of shame, regret, and an almost desperate yearning for redemption flickered there. I wondered how long he had carried this burden, how long the secret had gnawed at him in the shadows of his mind. I thought about the complexity of human pain and the fragile threads that bind guilt to forgiveness. Could he find his way back from this? Was there a path leading out of the darkness, or was he destined to dwell forever in its depths? In that silence, I felt the subtle yet profound importance of my presence. My role wasn't to offer quick solutions or to impose judgments. It was to remain unwavering, a steady anchor amid the chaos of his confession. I knew that words could be inadequate, that sometimes the most powerful act was to simply hold space, to let him be raw and unfiltered in his truth. I could see the flicker of hope in his eyes. Perhaps he was seeking reassurance, or perhaps he was just searching for the courage to face what lay ahead. My mind drifted to the delicate balance between pain and forgiveness, how easily the scales could tip, how fragile the process of healing truly was. I asked myself if I had the strength to walk this path with him, to be patient when progress seemed slow, to listen when words failed. Could I provide the sanctuary he so desperately needed, even if it meant confronting the uncomfortable truths that lurked beneath the surface? I knew that the answers wouldn't come from me alone. This was a journey he had to undertake, but I could offer the steady companionship of someone willing to stay through the storm. The memory of our previous conversations echoed softly in my mind, reminding me of the layers of pain he had carried all his life. I saw how guilt could shape a person, how shame could turn into a prison, and I wondered whether this confession was a step toward freedom or merely the beginning of a new chapter of suffering. I could feel the significance of my silence, a testament to my understanding that sometimes words would only serve to complicate what was already complex enough. As I continued to look at him, I realized that this moment was a stark reflection of human vulnerability, a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the depths of remorse and the possibility of redemption. I understood that I was witnessing a turning point, a fissure in his defenses that might allow light to seep through if nurtured carefully. It was a fragile glimmer, but it was enough to reaffirm my commitment to be here, to listen, and to bear witness to what was perhaps the most profound confession of all. In the stillness that followed, I allowed the silence to stretch, knowing that sometimes the most meaningful response was no response at all. Just my presence, just my steady breathing, just the quiet acknowledgement that he was not alone in this darkness. And as I sat there, I realized that my role was not to fix or judge, but to serve as a witness to his truth, an unwavering presence that might someday help him find his way back to the light. I sat silently, the heavy weight of his words lingering in the air like a dense fog that refused to lift. My mind churned with a tumult of conflicting emotions, fascination tinged with an undercurrent of fear, and beneath it all, a gnawing guilt that seemed to flicker alive at his confession. It was as if his truth had cracked open a long-sealed vault within me, unleashing memories I tried to bury, echoes of my own past mistakes that now reverberated with an unexpected clarity. His eyes, those haunted, fragmented windows, darted around the room, seeking something I couldn't quite grasp. A plea? A warning? Or perhaps just the desperate hope that someone would listen without judgment, without condemnation. I noticed how his hands trembled, a subtle shiver that betrayed the steadiness he desperately sought to project. Every word he uttered seemed to carve a scar into the silence, each syllable heavy with remorse and regret. I felt an almost visceral pull, this fascination, this dread, mingled with a strange empathy I hadn't anticipated. His confession was no mere admission. It was a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the abyss of human despair. I wondered what demons haunted him, what darkness had driven him to this brink, and whether in this moment I could be a bridge back to some semblance of redemption. Yet, I knew that any instinct to intervene or offer comfort would be premature. Instead, I chose to remain rooted, to absorb his truth without interference. The room seemed to contract around us, the air thickening with unspoken thoughts. Outside, the world continued obliviously, cars passing, lives unfolding in the vibrant tapestry of the city. Yet here, in this confined space, time slowed, measured by the weight of shared silence. I could feel the tremors within me. Fascination, yes, but also a primal fear that this confession might open a floodgate I was unprepared to contain. A cold gust of awareness crept through my bones as I recognized the depth of his vulnerability. His words, spoken with trembling conviction, pierced through my defenses, awakening a buried empathy I hadn't consciously acknowledged. I realized that beneath the layers of guilt and shame, there was a plea for understanding, a cry from the depths of a fractured soul seeking solace. I wondered if my silence could serve as enough of a refuge, a space where he could finally unburden himself without fear of rejection. I thought about the journey that had brought him here, and how fragile the path toward healing must be. I pondered whether my mere presence, this steady, unwavering witness, could offer some small measure of comfort, a reassurance that he was not alone in his darkness. Perhaps that was all he needed right now. Acknowledgement, acceptance, and the knowledge that someone bore witness to his truth without turning away. The flicker of light, however faint, sparked within me. I recognized that this moment was not about offering solutions or fixing what could not be fixed in a single breath. It was about holding space for his pain, allowing him to unravel the tangled knots of his conscience at his own pace. In that silence, I found a profound strength, an act of quiet rebellion against the urge to judge, to analyze, to diminish. My heart pounded softly in my chest, not from fear, but from an awareness of the gravity of what lay before us. I understood that this confession, this act of surrender, was a seed planted in the soil of vulnerability. My role, I realized, was to nurture it with patience and compassion, to remain steadfast as he navigated the turbulent waters of remorse. As the minutes stretched, I allowed the silence to cocoon us, knowing that sometimes the most powerful response was simply being present. My steady breathing became a silent anchor, grounding both of us amid the storm of emotion. I acknowledged his pain without trying to diminish it, without rushing to find words that might only fragment the fragile peace emerging in that moment. In my core, I understood that I was witnessing a pivotal point, a crack in the armor of guilt that might someday widen into a doorway of healing. I didn't need to fill the space with empty reassurances or superficial comfort. Instead, I offered my unwavering presence, a mirror reflecting his own truth back to him. Perhaps, in some unseen way, this act of silent witness was a step toward liberation. I knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, paved with more confessions, more struggles, more nights where shadows threatened to swallow him whole. But for now, I held on to this fragile thread of hope, a belief that acknowledgement, no matter how raw and painful, could be the first step toward redemption. So I sat there, quietly, fully present, allowing him to find his words or remain in silence as he needed. I understood that sometimes the greatest act of compassion was simply to listen, without expectation, without judgment, trusting that in that space of shared vulnerability, healing might someday find its roots. As he finally whispered the words, "Fui eu que matei ela," I felt a tremor ripple through my entire being. The room seemed to tighten around us, the air thickening with unspoken truths. I sat there, silent, watching the flicker of anguish and desperation dance behind his eyes, and in that instant, I realized that my role as a listener had morphed into something far more complex, something dangerously close to coalescing with my own fears and secrets. My mind raced back to moments I tried to bury deep, the times I'd ignored the whispers of my own doubts, the times I'd silenced my conscience just to keep moving forward. His confession shattered the fragile shield I'd built around my own truth, as if his words had unlocked a door I'd been too afraid to open. I could feel the echoes of my own suppressed guilt stirring, tangling with his pain, creating a chaotic symphony of remorse that threatened to drown us both. I clenched my fists underneath my lap, fighting the urge to speak, to offer comfort that suddenly felt hollow and inadequate. Instead, I let my gaze stay fixed on him, seeing beyond his trembling exterior into the raw, unfiltered core of his suffering. I wondered if he sensed the storm raging inside me, or if my silence betrayed a secret I was unable or unwilling to reveal. His story, his darkness, was infecting the very space I occupied, and I couldn't tell where his pain ended and mine began. The memory of my own past struggles crept in. Silent nights filled with shame, the desperate urge to erase mistakes that haunted my dreams. I knew that, in some twisted way, we were intertwined in this moment, both prisoners of our own silent confessions. I had always believed that listening was a gift, a tool to provide solace, but now I questioned whether it was also a burden. Was I simply an unwitting accomplice to his self-destruction? Or was I, perhaps, unwittingly opening the door for my own redemption? I felt my pulse quicken as I fought the urge to reach out, to break the fragile silence with meaningless words. Instead, I allowed my presence to speak, a steady, unwavering force that refused to waver in the face of chaos. My own breath grew shallow, Each inhale a reminder that I had to stay grounded, that I could not let my own fears seep into this sacred space. My mind whispered warnings, but I silenced them, knowing that sometimes the most honest reply is no reply at all. In that shared silence, I became painfully aware of the fine line between empathy and entrapment. Was I helping him carry his burden, or was I inadvertently pulling him deeper into a web of guilt? The question haunted me, but deep inside, I understood that acknowledging pain, even when it threatens to consume us, was the first step toward healing. Perhaps, in some unspoken way, by listening to his darkest secrets, I was also exposing my own vulnerabilities, risking everything in the hope that, someday, truth might finally set us free. I drew a slow breath, feeling the weight of my own confession pressing against my chest. The room felt smaller, more intimate, an uncharted territory where words seemed inadequate, yet my presence could carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken regrets. I realized that my role was not to judge or to fix, but simply to bear witness, to stand at the crossroads of his confession and mine, and to accept the messiness of both. As the minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, I sensed that, despite the darkness, a faint glimmer of light was emerging, not as a grand revelation, but as a fragile promise that the truth, no matter how painful, could someday be the seed from which redemption grew. I knew I had to hold on to that hope, even as my own mind echoed with questions I dared not voice. In the quiet aftermath, I kept my gaze steady, my heart pounding with the silent understanding that sometimes the most profound act of love is simply to listen, without expectation, without judgment. To sit with someone in their darkness, knowing that within it lies the possibility of dawn. And as I sat there, I realized that I, too, was on a journey, one that intertwined with his, leading somewhere unknown, somewhere I could not yet see. The weight of Lucas's confession dragged my thoughts back through time, pulling up memories I had carefully buried. I couldn't ignore the flicker of pain in his eyes, a silent scream for forgiveness or perhaps just acknowledgement. His words echoed in my mind, reverberating like a haunting melody I tried to silence for years. And yet, beneath that storm of guilt and regret, I felt a flicker of empathy, a fragile thread connecting me to his suffering. My mind wandered to Clara, my sister, whose face haunted my every waking moment. The secret I had kept hidden for so long had become a silent specter in the back of my mind, whispering accusations I refused to confront. For years, I convinced myself that silence was my shield, that by not speaking, I protected her memory, or perhaps myself from the unthinkable truth. But now, sitting here with Lucas, I sensed that the walls of my silence were beginning to crumble, fragment by fragile fragment. I remembered the night it happened, how the shadows had played tricks on my eyes, how the darkness in her eyes mirrored the secrets I was now forced to face. I had been young, naive, and terrified. Truth had seemed too heavy a burden to bear. So I buried it deep, convincing myself that some things were better left in the dark, that ignorance would somehow shield me from pain. But the years had turned that shield into a prison, and I felt its cold bars tightening around my heart. Lucas's confession brought an icy wave that chilled my bones. His words had no sound, yet they reverberated louder than any scream. I watched him struggle to form the words, his shoulders trembling with the effort. I wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but I knew that what I carried was not so simple. My secret was a poison that had seeped into my marrow, corrupting everything I thought I knew about myself, about my sister, about truth. I wondered how much he knew, or if he was only beginning to understand the depths of his own darkness. Could I ever forgive him? Could I forgive myself? The questions spun wildly in my mind, each one more unbearable than the last. Yet amidst the chaos, I sensed a strange clarity emerging. Releasing these secrets, confronting them, was the only way to truly heal, to free myself from the shadow of the past. The room's silence was thick, almost suffocating. Outside, the world continued obliviously, unaware of the silent battles waged within these walls. I felt the heavy ache of loneliness, yet also a flicker of hope. Perhaps in sharing our darkest truths, we could find a new beginning, a way to forge a path out of the darkness, step by agonizing step. As I looked into Lucas's eyes, I realized that the secret I had carried for so long was no longer mine alone. It was a burden we now shared, a burden that demanded honesty, courage, and the willingness to face the repercussions. I was tired of hiding behind false pretenses, tired of pretending that some wounds could heal in silence. In that moment, I made a silent vow to myself and to him that I would not turn away from the truth anymore, that I would summon the strength to confront my past, no matter how painful it might be. Because somewhere beneath the layers of shame and regret, I knew there was a chance for redemption, a chance to finally set us both free. The air seemed to shift, lighter somehow, even as the past loomed heavy in the room. I took a slow, deliberate breath, feeling the trembling in my chest subside just enough to speak. Words felt inadequate, yet I knew I had to try. I reached out, not just with my hand, but with my whole being, ready to face whatever came next, to embrace the chaos, the truth, the possibility of healing, even if it meant venturing into the darkness I had long avoided. Because I understood now that silence isn't salvation. Sometimes the most profound act of love is to speak, to listen, to share the burden. And in doing so, perhaps we could finally begin to mend the broken pieces of ourselves. My body trembles silently, each shiver a testament to the storm raging inside me. My mind spirals back to those nights I desperately tried to bury, when the weight of my pain felt like an anchor dragging me deeper into despair. I remember the hollow ache of silence, the way I would drown my screams in solitude, convincing myself that if I could just suppress the ache long enough, it would eventually fade away. But it never did. It only festered beneath the surface, waiting, growing. Now, as I sit here, I become acutely aware of how close I am to my threshold. The edges of my sanity blur, my senses heightened by the raw vulnerability that floods through me. My breath catches, not from fear, but from the overwhelming realization that I am standing at the precipice of something I've long avoided, confronting the darkness I once believed was mine alone to carry. The room feels colder, the shadows stretching like silent witnesses to my unraveling. Outside, the world continues obliviously, indifferent to the storm that rages within these walls. Yet, in this quiet chaos, I see something sharper, clarity. The truth is no longer a distant echo I can ignore. It has become an indelible part of me, refusing to be silenced. I acknowledge that hiding, pretending I was okay, only deepened my wounds, turning them into scars I thought defined me. His voice still lingers in my mind, a haunting confession that shattered the fragile illusion of control I had clung to. I was the one who killed her, he had said, the words seeping into the cracks of my defenses, threatening to break me apart completely. I had listened, not with judgment, but with a heavy, aching silence. My instinct was to recoil, to shield myself from the truth that threatened to consume us both. But I knew, deep down, that silence was no longer an option. The weight of his admission pressed into the air like a heavy fog, closing in around us. I could feel the fracture in his voice, a plea for redemption wrapped in guilt and remorse. It was as if I had been holding my breath, and now, finally, I exhaled slowly, desperately. In that moment, I understood that our shared darkness was the crucible that could either forge us apart or bind us together anew. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to steady the tremor that threatened to break my composure. I thought about the countless nights I spent convincing myself I was strong enough to carry this alone. I thought about the shame that had kept me silent, the guilt that had shaped my every decision. But now, I saw that the only way forward was through the truth, through acknowledgement of the wounds, through facing the chaos, not avoiding it. As I opened my eyes, I found his gaze still fixed on me, transparent with vulnerability. I reached out, not just with my hand, but with my entire being, hoping that my gesture communicated what words could not. I wanted him to know that I was ready to face whatever came next, no matter how painful or uncertain, because I realized that healing begins with honesty, and honesty demands courage. In that moment, I understood that silence isn't salvation. Sometimes, the most profound form of love is to speak, to listen, to share the burden that has haunted us, to finally break free from the chains of secrecy and shame. I feel the trembling in my core, a mixture of fear and hope, yet I refuse to let it overpower me. Instead, I choose to step into the chaos, embracing the truth with all its scars, knowing that only through confronting the darkness can we find the light. This is the beginning of our journey, not an end. I accept that the road to healing is long and fraught with pain, but I also know that in revealing my darkness, I am opening the door to something new: redemption, understanding, and perhaps, finally, peace. I take a deep breath, steadied by the promise that beneath every shadow, there is a seed of hope waiting to bloom, and I am determined to nurture it, no matter how fragile or fleeting it may seem. I watch as Lucas's eyes shimmer with tears, his voice trembling almost beyond recognition. He repeats, almost like a prayer, "It was me who killed her," and I feel my heart tighten, not with anger or disgust, but with a desperate curiosity. Is he truly convinced of his own lie? Or is there some twisted part of him that believes in his guilt? Or perhaps he's trying so hard to convince himself that the words escape involuntarily, as if voicing his confession could somehow make the burden lighter. His voice cracks on the last word, and I see the flicker of a storm inside him. Confusion, remorse, shame, all tangled together. It's as if he's reaching out into the void, seeking reassurance from a truth he cannot accept. I wonder if he's fabricating a story so that the weight of his guilt becomes real, or if he's drowning in the guilt itself, unable to distinguish between what he did and what he wishes he had done differently. I can't help but notice how his hands tremble, how his entire frame seems to shrink beneath the weight of his words. I sit there, rooted in place, feeling the silence stretch out like an infinite abyss. My mind races, trying to break down the layers of what he's saying, of what he's hiding behind his confession. Is this a plea for forgiveness? Or an act of self-punishment? I don't know. Perhaps I never will. In that moment, I realize that the room holds more than just our voices. It holds the unspoken stories, the buried fears, the unacknowledged pain. His words are echoes of a fractured soul, and I wonder if he truly believes them, or if they're just a desperate attempt to make sense of what's been broken beyond repair. The line between truth and lie blurs, and I feel the pull of an invisible thread, one that links both our wounds and our hope for redemption. I shift slightly, my gaze softening, but my mind remains alert. Every muscle in my body is tuned to his trembling voice, to the silent plea hidden behind his words. I want to reach out, to tell him that it's okay not to be okay, that sometimes the truth is too heavy to carry alone. But I hold back, knowing that my silence might speak louder than any reassurance I could offer. As he repeats his confession, almost like a prayer, I am struck by the absurdity of it all. How can someone believe their own lie so fervently that it becomes a part of their identity? How can guilt carve such deep scars that they distort reality? I think of all the nights he spent wrestling with ghosts, real or imagined, and I feel a flicker of compassion ignite within me. I wonder if he's trying to convince himself of his innocence, or if he's simply lost in a maze of his own making. Either way, I recognize that this moment is a mirror, reflecting not just his internal chaos, but my own. The questions I carry, the doubts I hide behind my professional mask, all surface now. I realize that my role isn't just to listen, but to witness, to hold space for these raw, unfiltered truths that threaten to undo us both. The air feels heavier with every passing second. I can see the crack in his facade, the vulnerability he's desperately trying to conceal. I want to tell him that no matter what, he's not alone. That somehow, amidst the wreckage of his words, there is a sliver of hope. But I know that words are fragile, and sometimes silence is the only answer that truly understands. Instead, I lean forward just slightly, my voice quiet but steady. I remind myself that authenticity lies in acceptance, not in denial. So I say nothing for a moment, letting the silence settle between us, heavy yet soothing. It's in this stillness that I feel the first faint glimmer of trust forming, the kind that can only grow in the soil of honesty, no matter how thorny or dark. In that suspended space, I accept the reality of his confession, whatever its truth. I acknowledge the pain, his and mine, and I let it seep into my bones. Because I know that healing isn't about denying the darkness. It's about confronting it head on, no matter how uncomfortable the truth might be. As I sit there, watching him trembling with remorse, I feel a strange sense of peace. For despite the chaos, there's a silent promise passing between us, that somehow, in facing this shared suffering, we might find a way to piece ourselves back together, to rebuild from the shattered fragments of the past, one fragile step at a time. And in that moment, I realize that the only way forward is through honesty, raw, unfiltered, and unafraid. Because only then can we truly begin to heal. A sudden wave of curiosity crashes over me, mingling with an undercurrent of fear that makes my stomach tighten. The words hang in the air, thick and oppressive, as I grapple with an instinct I've learned to suppress. Should I press further into this abyss, or should I retreat into silence? Every fiber of my being screams for clarity, for understanding, yet part of me recoils at what I might uncover. I sit there, frozen for a moment, my mind racing through the possibilities. The room feels smaller, the shadows stretching longer as my gaze fixates on his trembling hands. His eyes flicker with a raw desperation, like a wounded animal caught between fight and flight. I notice the subtle quiver in his voice when he speaks, a tremor that betrays the weight of his confession. Is this the moment to push him to peel back another layer of his suffering? Or would that push him further in his silence, deeper into his own darkness? I know from experience that some truths are too fragile to be forcibly uncovered. Yet I also believe that withholding might leave us stranded in this suffocating limbo. My hand hovers near my lap, unsure whether to reach out or to hold back. The room feels colder now, the silence stretching between us like an unbreakable barrier. Outside, the world continues unaffected, cars passing by, distant voices blending into a muted hum. Yet inside here, everything has slowed to a crawl. I can almost hear the whisper of my own heartbeat, loud in the stillness. It's as if the very air is waiting for me to choose, a moment suspended, teetering on the edge of revelation. I glance at him again, searching his face for any sign of what he might want. Do I ask him why? Do I seek to understand the depths of his remorse? Or do I simply sit with this uncertainty, allowing it to sit in the space between us, unspoken but felt? The temptation to pry is fierce, yet I know that sometimes silence carries more weight than words ever could. In that quiet, I realize that my curiosity is intertwined with my fear. Fear of what I might discover, fear of how deep this rabbit hole goes. But beneath that, there's a flicker of hope, fragile and tentative. Perhaps, in holding back just a little longer, I can give him space to decide whether he wants to reveal more or to retreat into silence himself. I think about what it means to truly listen, not to rush to fill the void with questions, but to allow the space for him to speak if he chooses, to respect his boundaries even as I feel the pull to understand more. It's in these moments of restraint that trust begins to seed itself, small yet potent, promising that maybe, just maybe, we can be honest with each other, without forcing, without demanding. The question lingers on my mind. Should I deepen this conversation, risking everything, or should I shield us both from further pain? I know that every choice has consequences, that every silence can be deafening or healing depending on how it's handled. My instincts scream for answers, yet I also recognize the importance of patience, the delicate art of letting someone reveal their truth when they're ready. As I sit with this dilemma, I feel a strange sense of calm threading through the chaos. The kind that comes from accepting that some parts of this process are beyond my control. That true understanding may take time. That sometimes the most powerful thing I can do is simply be present. A faint smile touches my lips, not because I have answers, but because I understand that this moment is part of a larger, uncertain journey. That perhaps the only way forward is to stay open, curious without demanding, compassionate without judgment. To allow space for the darkness to be acknowledged, for the wounds to be seen, and for the silence to speak its own quiet truth. I breathe in slowly, reminding myself that every question I hold, every hesitation I feel, is part of this fragile dance. The dance of vulnerability, of trust, of hope emerging from the shadows. And in that realization, I find a sliver of peace, knowing that sometimes the most profound answers lie just beyond the edge of silence, waiting patiently for us to be brave enough to listen. My heart races as I process his words, each syllable like a thunderclap echoing in the silent chamber of my mind. The confession hangs between us, thick and suffocating, yet somehow liberating. For years, I buried my own guilt beneath layers of silence, telling myself that some wounds were better left unexamined. But now, standing in the raw exposure of his pain, I realized that my silence was a shield as much as it was a prison. His eyes flicker with torment, vulnerability spilling over like a fractured mirror reflecting 1,000 broken pieces. I watch him struggle to breathe, to hold onto whatever fragments of redemption he believes he still has. It's a fragile scene, one I never thought I'd witness, yet somehow I've been waiting for it all along. Not for blame, but for understanding. The air around us feels colder, the world outside shrinking into insignificance. My senses sharpen, each detail amplified. The faint tremor in his voice, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, the way his hands tremble as if holding onto the last shreds of hope. I want to reach out, to comfort, to tell him that he's not alone in this darkness. But instead, I remain still, a silent witness to his confession. Maybe it's the only way he can truly unburden himself, to be heard without interruption, without correction. A strange calm settles within me, a paradox that I can't quite grasp. I feel the weight of my own past, years of silence, of pretending that I was unaffected, that I had moved past the shadows. Yet here I am, face to face with the possibility that my own guilt has lurked beneath the surface all along, disguised as strength or indifference. Perhaps the truth has been waiting patiently, hidden beneath layers of denial, for this moment to be revealed. I notice how his voice falters when he admits to his deed, and I wonder if he's been carrying this secret for so long that it's become a part of him. A toxic, invisible anchor tethered to his soul. I recognize the trembling in my own chest, an unspoken recognition that I, too, have held on to things I dared not speak aloud. The difference is, I never dared to confront them until now. As I sit with this revelation, I realize that my response must be careful, deliberate. Words feel inadequate in this sacred space of truth. Instead, I choose presence, an unspoken promise that I am here, that I hear him, that I see the man behind the confession. I resist the urge to judge, to analyze, to fix. Instead, I let silence be our shared language for a moment, knowing that sometimes words can shatter what takes years to build. In the quiet, I feel a flicker of something unexpected, an ember of hope perhaps, that even amidst the darkness, there can be a flickering light, a possibility for redemption. Not because I believe in easy answers or quick forgiveness, but because I understand that healing is a complex tapestry woven from threads of pain, remorse, and the courage to face oneself. My mind races through memories of my own battles, the hidden truths I've kept locked away, the moments when silence was my refuge and my prison. I realize that his confession has unlocked something within me, stirring dormant feelings I had long suppressed. The truth is, I've been waiting for this moment, not to judge, but to understand how deep the wounds run, how they shape us, how they threaten to consume us if left unspoken. I feel tears prick my eyes, not from sorrow, but from a profound sense of connection. We are both travelers lost in a forest of regret and regret's shadows, searching for a clearing, a way forward. I know that what he's shared is only the beginning, a fragile opening that requires patience, compassion, and perhaps most importantly, time. As I gather my thoughts, I realize that my role isn't to offer answers, but to walk beside him on this uncertain path. To be a steady presence when the night feels too long, when the guilt threatens to overpower him, and when hope seems distant. I understand now that the power of this moment isn't in what I say, but in the simple act of bearing witness. A gentle breath escapes me, and I let it be the bridge back to him. I want him to know I won't turn away, that his truth is safe with me, that sometimes the most profound act of compassion is to listen without interruption or judgment, to hold space for the darkness and the light both to coexist. In that silent understanding, I find a quiet strength. I realize that the road to healing isn't a straight line, nor is it easy. It's a winding journey paved with honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront what we fear most. And in this moment, I accept that I too am part of that journey, an imperfect guide navigating the shadows alongside him. My heart feels heavy, yet strangely light. There's a sense of liberation in finally facing what was once buried beneath layers of fear. I know that this confession, this raw admission, marks the beginning of something new, a fragile hope that, perhaps, through our shared darkness, we can find a sliver of light to carry us forward. I watched him retreat, each step slow and deliberate, as if he were trying to leave behind the weight of his confession, but knew it would cling to him no matter how far he walked. His shoulders hunched forward, almost as if he expected the ground to open beneath him and swallow him whole. My mind spun with questions. What had driven him to this point? Was he seeking absolution, or merely an escape from the unbearable truth? And yet, amid the chaos of my thoughts, a strange calm settled. I clenched my fists subtly, anchoring myself in the present, trying not to let the storm within me erupt. Part of me wanted to reach out, to grasp his arm and stop him, to demand answers, to make him see that I was here, that I cared. But another, quieter part urged patience. Perhaps this was the moment he needed to find his own way, to face whatever punishment or redemption awaited him. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I felt my heart pounding, a relentless echo that refused to quiet. The desire to protect him warred with a primal instinct to expose the truth, to bring light to the darkness he carried. I wondered whether I should speak, whether words could serve as balm, or whether they would only deepen the wounds. Instead, I stayed motionless, a silent witness to this profound fracture of a man's soul. As he moved further away, I caught a glimpse of the tremor in his hand, barely perceptible, yet enough to reveal the turmoil roiling beneath. Did he see himself as a villain or a victim? Perhaps both. The lines blurred in his mind, just as they blurred in mine. My instinct was to shield him from the consequences, to erase the shadows cast by his confession, but I knew that wouldn't serve either of us. The truth, no matter how difficult, needed to be faced. I shifted slightly in my seat, fighting the urge to call out, to stop him from slipping into the abyss of his guilt. But what would I say? Would words be enough to bridge the gap between us? I realized that sometimes the greatest act of compassion isn't to intervene, but to simply be present, to hold space, to accept the chaos and the calm, the darkness and the light that reside within us all. My thoughts spiraled, tangled in a web of dilemmas. Part of me felt an overwhelming urge to report, to ensure that justice would be served, that the weight of his actions would be acknowledged and dealt with appropriately. Yet a deeper, more conflicted voice whispered that true healing begins with acknowledgement and acceptance, not punishment alone. Could I trust that revealing my own doubts and fears might somehow serve as a bridge rather than a barrier? The air grew heavier, thick with unspoken truths. I saw the flicker of despair in his eyes, a mirror to my own fears. I wondered if he believed redemption was impossible, if he thought himself beyond salvation. And I wondered whether I was prepared to carry the burden of this knowledge, whether I could hold his secret without losing myself in the process. My gaze lingered on him as he hesitated at the doorframe, as if weighing whether to step forward or retreat further into darkness. I felt a strange kinship, a shared vulnerability that made me want to reach out, to say something that might offer him even a flicker of hope. But what? What could I possibly say that would ease the ache in his soul or bring clarity to the chaos inside? Instead, I simply watched, breathing in the tension that clung to the room like a tangible force. I allowed my eyes to convey understanding, acceptance, and a quiet willingness to walk this rocky road with him. If I had learned anything, it was that sometimes silence is the most powerful response, a refuge for wounds that words could never mend. As he finally turned away, his figure silhouetted against the fading light, I felt a mixture of helplessness and resolve. I knew I could not change what had happened, nor could I fully comprehend the depths of his remorse. But I could choose to remain present, to stay grounded in the truth that beneath his pain lay a fragile hope, one that might someday grow stronger if nurtured with patience and genuine compassion. The room seemed to hold its breath as he disappeared into the shadowed corridor. I sat there, shoulders heavy but mind clearer, knowing that this moment, this raw, unfiltered truth, was only the beginning. A start that promised no immediate resolution, only the slow, arduous process of understanding and forgiveness, both for him and for myself. I realized then that the journey would be long, perhaps even impossible at times, but I was committed to walking it nonetheless. In the quiet aftermath, I felt a subtle shift within. The storm that once raged now simmered, replaced by a cautious optimism, an acknowledgement that even amid darkness, a sliver of light can flicker if we dare to stay. And in that moment, I made a silent vow to remain a steady presence, no matter how turbulent the road ahead. I sat motionless, the silence stretching between us like a fragile bridge crumbling under the weight of unspoken truths. His words echoed in my mind. I was the one who killed her, a confession that cut deeper than any physical wound I had ever known. For a moment, I wondered if I had misheard, if I was supposed to respond with outrage, pity, or perhaps denial. But I didn't. Instead, I simply listened, feeling an invisible tether tighten between us, anchoring us both to this shared darkness. His voice trembled, cracking under the pressure of guilt he could no longer contain. I watched the shadows flicker across his face, revealing the raw, fractured core beneath. I saw in his eyes a desperate plea, an unspoken request for forgiveness, for understanding, for something I wasn't sure I could give. Yet, I knew choosing silence was perhaps the most honest response I could offer in that moment, a space for his pain to breathe without the suffocation of my immediate reactions. The air grew thick with unexpressed emotion. I sensed that beneath his remorse lay a labyrinth of secrets he had long tried to bury. My mind raced with questions. What led him to this point? Was it anger, despair, an accident hidden behind layers of shame? I wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to tell him that I understood, that I saw past the guilt to the human beneath. But instead, I remained rooted in stillness, letting the truth settle between us like dust in a forgotten room. As the confession hung heavy, I felt a strange kinship form, an unspoken connection rooted in shared suffering. We were both prisoners of our own stories, carrying scars invisible to the world. The pain we harbored wasn't ours alone. It intertwined, a delicate, haunting thread that binded our histories of loss, secrets, and truths too sacred or too terrible to speak aloud. The room seemed to shrink around us, the outside world dissolving into insignificance. I thought about the weight of unspoken words, of all the stories left untold, of the memories buried beneath layers of silence. My heart ached, not with judgment, but with empathy. I wondered how anyone could carry such guilt and remain standing, how one could face another day with such a burden pressing down. Yet, amid the storm of my swirling thoughts, I recognized one thing. This moment was just the beginning. A fragile seed planted in the soil of pain, waiting to be nurtured or crushed under the weight of time. I knew I had a choice, either to turn away or to stay and witness what might emerge from the ashes of his confession. I chose to stay, to be present, to hold space for his suffering without trying to fix it, without demanding answers. I understood that some wounds weren't meant to be healed overnight, that forgiveness was a slow process, sometimes measured in small, trembling steps rather than grand gestures. I sensed that beneath his remorse lay a flicker of hope, the possibility that redemption, if it ever existed, might be born from the acknowledgement of truth, no matter how dark or painful. In that silence, I felt my own defenses weaken, my heart opening just a crack wider. I realized then that our connection, this invisible thread, wasn't about fixing or judging. It was about bearing witness. Because sometimes the greatest act of compassion is simply listening, allowing the raw, unfiltered truth to surface without fear or pretense. As he finally fell silent, exhaustion washing over him like a tide, I knew I'd carry this moment with me forever, not as a burden, but as a testament to the fragile, resilient threads that tie us together in our darkest hours. I promised myself then that I would remain steadfast in my presence, that I wouldn't turn away from the shadows, but walk through them with him, step by tentative step. Because in the end, I understood that healing isn't about erasing the past or pretending the pain doesn't exist. It's about holding space for it, allowing it to breathe, and perhaps someday to transform. And I would be there, silent, steadfast, and willing to witness whatever came next in this long, uncertain journey toward redemption. As I slowly turned the doorknob, each creak echoing like a crack in my carefully constructed calm, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in that small, suffocating space, a sanctuary and a prison all at once. My hand lingered on the cold surface for a moment, as if anchoring myself to the present, to the reality that for now, nothing else mattered but this fragile moment. I perceived that my breath had become shallow, my heart pounding in a rhythm I could no longer control. Walking away from the chaos, I realized that my life, in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged, had been irrevocably altered. That simple act of closing the door was more than physical. It was symbolic of the path I was about to walk, a journey I could neither retreat from nor control. I knew that deep within me, a part of me was forever changed, woven into the fabric of this confession, this raw honesty that had burst forth like an uncontainable storm. As I pressed my back against the wall, I watched the door for a moment longer, feeling an almost primal awareness that this was a threshold, an endpoint, and a beginning all at once. The quiet was deafening. In the stillness, I detected the faintest whisper of my own thoughts, fragile and tentative, trying to make sense of what I had just heard, what I had just witnessed. The words echoed in my mind, faint yet thunderous. Fui eu kamete ella. I could feel the weight of those words settling into my bones, a burden that refused to dissipate. What struck me most was not the confession itself, but the silence that followed, an unexplored expanse where meaning struggled to form. I allowed myself to breathe deeply, though each inhale felt like I was inhaling shattered glass. My mind raced, trying to piece together what this revelation meant for him, for me, for the unfathomable space between us. I wondered if he expected me to react, to judge, to condemn, yet I felt a different urge rising within me, an ache to simply listen, to hold space for his truth in all its brutal honesty. In that moment, I glimpsed the flickering remnants of remorse and hope intertwined, a delicate dance of despair and the faint glimmer of redemption. I realized that his admission was not the end, but a fragile beginning. The complexity of it all threatened to drown me. How one confession could carry such weight, yet also offer a tiny, shimmering thread of possibility. Hope, I understood then, was not a grand gesture or a sweeping gesture of forgiveness. It was in the small, trembling acknowledgement of what had been done and the willingness to confront it, no matter how dark or painful. I felt my own defenses begin to crumble as I absorbed the enormity of what he shared. My instinct was to recoil, to retreat into the safety of my judgment or silence. But I forced myself to stay, to accept that sometimes the most profound act of compassion was simply to remain present, unflinching, and attuned to the fragile vulnerability shining through his confession. The room seemed to thicken with unspoken truths, and I understood that this moment was a threshold, an opening into something deeper. It was not about fixing what was broken or washing away the stain of the past. It was about bearing witness, about holding the raw, jagged edges of his story without attempting to smooth or deny them. I saw in his eyes a plea for understanding, a plea that didn't demand answers but simply sought acknowledgement. As I finally turned away from the door, my hand trembling slightly, I felt an unshakable sense that my life, this moment, was irrevocably changed. The act of closing that door, and the confession behind it, had carved a new path within me. I knew I would carry the weight of this forever, not as a burden, but as a testament to the raw, unfiltered truth that binds us all in moments of darkness. I walked into the quiet, my footsteps slow and deliberate, each step a silent vow to remain present, to listen, truly listen, to what was yet to come. Because I understood that healing isn't about erasing darkness or pretending pain never existed. It's about holding space for it, allowing it to breathe, to transform in its own time. And I knew, in that quiet surrender, that I would stay steadfast and unwavering, through the shadows, through the pain, through whatever future revelations awaited us. Because sometimes listening is the bravest act we can offer. And in that act, I found a faintest spark of hope flickering, fragile but persistent, illuminating the uncertain road ahead. That night, I sat in the silence, the heavy weight of his confession hanging in the air like a thick fog that refused to lift. The dim glow of the lamp cast soft shadows across the room, but nothing could mask the tumult swirling behind his eyes. I watched him, not with judgment, but with a keen, almost painful clarity, seeing the cracks and fractures that he tried so desperately to hide. His voice was barely above a whisper when he finally spoke those words I had feared but somehow anticipated, Fui iu kemete ella. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where meaning and consequence collided. I felt my breath catch, my mind trying to process the enormity of what I'd just heard. Yet my body remained still, rooted in a space between instinct and acceptance. In that moment, I was acutely aware that this wasn't just his confession. It was a mirror held up to my own unspoken fears and doubts. I could feel a ripple inside me, a mixture of empathy, curiosity, and something darker I couldn't quite define. It wasn't shock or horror I felt, but a strange, almost reverent acknowledgement that truth often lurks in the shadows, unadorned and unfiltered. My eyes lingered on him, searching for the flicker of remorse, or maybe a plea for forgiveness. Instead, I saw only vulnerability, raw and unguarded. I realized that my role was no longer to decipher or dissect, but simply to witness, to hold space for this moment, fragile as it was. I let the silence stretch between us, knowing that words would only diminish what needed to be felt rather than spoken. As the minutes ticked by, I became aware of how the room seemed to shrink, drawing us into a smaller, more intimate universe of shared secrets and silent suffering. I wondered how much of his pain was buried beneath layers of guilt, shame, and perhaps a desperate need for redemption. And I wondered, How much of my own story was intertwined with his confession? How much of my own darkness I had hidden behind the veneer of professionalism? In the quiet that followed, I started to confront my ghosts, the unspoken memories, the unshed tears, the times I had chosen silence over confrontation. I realized then that my meditation on listening was transforming into a voyage of self-discovery. That every story I encountered was a mirror, reflecting back aspects of my own unresolved wounds. I thought about the power of simply being present, of not trying to fix or judge, but to accept that some truths are too vast for words. That sometimes our greatest act of compassion is merely to listen without interruption, to allow the weight of another's darkness to settle in, knowing it's part of the collective human experience. The room felt colder, yet I felt a strange warmth creeping beneath my skin, a quiet resolve to stay, no matter how uncomfortable or painful the truths that would emerge next. I understood that by bearing witness, I was participating in something sacred, a shared act of vulnerability that could, in time, lead to healing. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling the tremor of my own internal landscape. Each scar, each regret, each moment of silence I had refused to confront. It was in that reflection that I found my purpose reaffirmed. To listen unconditionally and without judgment. To hold space for darkness, for truth, for transformation. And in that realization, I knew that this night was only the beginning. That the road ahead would be fraught with more confessions, more revelations, some light, some shadow, but that I would walk it alongside him, steady and unwavering. Because I understood that in the act of truly listening, I was also listening to myself. And perhaps that was the most profound healing of all. As the last flicker of the bedside lamp dimmed into darkness, I couldn't shake the sensation that the night had sealed a new chapter in my life. One marked indelibly by Lucas's confession and the silent weight of everything I had only listened to. A profound shift took root within me, as if the act of merely hearing had torn open a part of my soul I hadn't known was closed. My mind replayed his words, slow and deliberate, each syllable echoing louder in the silence. Fuiu kamete Ella, he had said, and though I had heard the words, they refused to settle comfortably inside me. Instead, they spread like ink through water, dark, inescapable, unrepentant. I felt a strange paradox fluttering within, an urge to recoil and an equally compelling need to stay rooted, to allow his truth to unfold without interference. There's a peculiar kind of intimacy in silence like this, in the unspoken acknowledgement that some revelations aren't meant to be fixed or judged, but simply held. I saw his trembling hands, the way his shoulders sagged under the burden of guilt, and I wondered how many nights he had carried that secret alone. I wondered how long he had been waiting, almost daring to say the words out loud, not expecting understanding, but desperately needing release. As I sat there, I was acutely aware that my role was not to dissect or dismiss, but to become a vessel of presence. In that space, I imagined myself as a quiet harbor, offering refuge from the storm of his confession. I didn't want to distort his truth with my interpretations. Rather, I wanted to be a mirror reflecting that darkness without distortion, without trying to change what was there. I understood that sometimes the most powerful act we can offer someone is simply to listen, without judgment, without interruption. The air around us seemed to thicken, the atmosphere saturated with unsaid things, with the ghosts of past choices and pain unresolved. I felt the chill, but beneath that, an unexpected warmth grew, an acceptance that the truth, even when it is brutal or heartbreaking, has its rightful place. Perhaps, I thought, this moment was a fragile thread connecting us, a delicate weave of shared human vulnerability. My thoughts drifted to the countless nights I had spent avoiding my own shadows, ignoring my scars and regrets. In that quiet, I recognized the universality of pain, the way secrets fester in the dark, waiting for a sliver of courage to expose them. Lucas's confession was more than a revelation. It was a mirror held up to my own hidden fears, my unspoken wounds. In that instant, I realized that my purpose extended beyond listening. It was about holding space, not just for Lucas, but for all the darkness that each of us carries. To be a witness in these moments isn't merely an act of compassion. It's a sacred act of trust, an acknowledgement that transformation begins when we permit ourselves to be seen in our rawest form. As the minutes stretched on, a faint sense of peace settled over me. I knew this was just the beginning, not an endpoint. The road ahead would be lined with more confessions, more truths that might shatter or heal, depending on how they were received. But I also knew that I would walk that path alongside him, steady and unwavering, because I understood the profound truth. In truly listening, I was also listening to myself. The weight I felt was no longer oppressive, but grounding, anchoring me in a reality that is often too difficult to face. It was as if, in that quiet, I had crossed a threshold into an understanding that the act of listening isn't passive, it's transformative. It is a gift we give and receive in equal measure. The room remained cloaked in darkness, yet a new light flickered within me, a gentle illumination born from acceptance and compassion that I would carry forward. I knew, with certainty, that this night marked the start of something irrevocable, a truth that would linger within me long after the shadows receded. And as I slowly prepared to extinguish the last remnants of light, I felt a quiet certainty settle deep inside. My story, too, was forever changed. By Lucas's confession and by the unspoken truths that had finally found a voice, I had stepped into a new understanding of what it means to bear witness, to hold space, and to truly listen. Because sometimes the most powerful act of healing isn't in what we say, but in what we allow ourselves to hear.